In this lesson, we're going to talk about shaping a section of your solo. We talked about settings. Right? So let's say you've chosen a setting. I want to play this type of thing in the solo. We've thought about the web of intent. Right? This gives us sort of musical leverage that we can use. What you'll find on the web of intent is that typically, probably safe to say with any continuum, but let's say just for the most part, moving in one direction will increase the tension. Moving in the other direction will release the tension. It's less tension. Of course, it's all relative, right? A jump from here to here feels similar to a jump from here to here. But with this in mind, what we can start to think about is the shape of a solo. So let's say we're moving, let's say the busyness and empty continuum. For the most part, busyness is going to build tension. Emptiness is going to be less tense. So we can start thinking about moving along these, creating an arc or a shape for the solo. In this lesson, I want to talk about 6 sort of standard shapes to a section that you can start to experiment with the vocabulary that you have within the setting, using the web of intent, whatever continuum that you're exploring. And let's think about some of these basic ideas. These are one section at a time. So we're not yet really thinking about the full solo, what that needs to feel like. But the full solo's effectiveness, essentially, will depend on what happens within each setting that you move through. And again, oftentimes a solo can be just one setting. And since that's often the case, and since even if you have a couple, they tend to sort of be felt as separate movements within the solo. Really, the most important type of shape we can build is the within section shape. So, simple enough, let's take a look at some of these. The first one is no movement, right? And this sounds like sort of like it's a non-answer, but this is actually an important one. And it's important to think about one implication. So this is you have one setting and it's static. So you're not really trying to move. Now I talked about earlier the gray zone. And this is where we have this danger. But not moving doesn't necessarily mean you're immediately in the gray zone. Right? You have some window of time where you can sit and let it simmer. But you're not really building tension. You're not releasing anything. You're not necessarily going anywhere. But there's some window of time where that's cool. And what that will depend on, one of a few things, which we'll talk about in greater detail later, but one of them could be repetition, or the other could be actually the opposite, the variety of vocabulary you have within that setting. Right? So let's say, I'm going to play 8th note groove. And actually, I think the setting in this case is more of a flow groove. So my hands are going to be flowing while I play a groove. So let's see if I can do a static shape, not a lot of movement along any continuum, and keep it interesting. The challenge with this one, the reason that this isn't the one I'm going to recommend we think very hard about, is because it is dependent on you having a lot of varied vocabulary within the setting. So if I have a bunch of tricks I can keep pulling out, right, then each trick's kind of interesting enough to keep it going without me needing to change any significant sort of meta factor of what's going on, right? This is tough because, again, it relies on you amassing a lot of vocabulary. And for me as well, this is one setting where I feel probably comfortable doing this relatively effectively. But first of all, it runs out of steam eventually. You just run out of tricks. And then there are other settings where I just don't have that much depth of novelty to keep throwing at the audience. So let's just try this, see what it sounds like. Okay? I'm not bored yet as the player, but I am kind of getting there. But hey, this works. This works okay. It's just a little bit of my solo, and it's working. I think I could simplify a lot, and it would still be possible here. Let's try, especially if the thing itself is really satisfying. You can do less, create less change, and people want to hear it more. So let's say I'm doing a sort of half swung swanky groove, which is kind of like it's off the grid. It's got like inherently interesting push and pull to it built in. And I just won't change much. And let's see, as a listener, be genuinely listening for when this sort of just like gets old, right? It will at some point. So here we go. And I'm going to try to not move in any significant direction. 3 and 4 and okay, it's fine. That's probably about the max. Before you start to, right, you even heard me start to do it, like I wanted to drop a kick drum out. But that's movement along the all instruments, one instrument continuum. I wanted to add fills at the end of the phrases. But that's kind of dipping into a different shape that we're going to talk about now. So anyways, it is an option. Remain static. It has a certain effect. It's important to identify that and identify the challenges. All right. Next shape is, again, something we sort of naturally do when we're drumming, the groove and fills shape. So we're grooving, fills, back to the groove, fills, back to the groove, right? This is sort of your standard, let's play a fill at the end of every 4 or 8 bars type of thing. Again, really standard, but not bad, right? So again, the challenge with this shape is that it's going to depend on our being able to play cool stuff, because it doesn't really inherently move anywhere. It'll, like, the fills will be moments of like, and then we go back, but you can only really do so many of those before like it doesn't really have that effect anymore, unless you can just keep playing crazier fills. So let me try to demonstrate this. And again, let's feel how effective it is. And let's feel when it starts to lose steam. These are important things to tune into as the listener, so that as the player, you have a better idea of how your listener is experiencing what you're doing. Let's choose. Okay, so I'm trying to really reach into my cool fill vocabulary here, because I'm getting a little desperate, right? So the 6th time around here, it's feeling like the fill is indeed cool. And then it goes back to the groove, and it feels like it kind of deflates. It kind of loses steam. So in a sense, I could see this being Well, what needs to happen, you probably felt this too. Let's say I did 4 of these. And I'm like, okay, this section, I'm going to try to showcase my fill material. Play a simple groove, crazy fill material that I've been working on. Back to the crazy groove, so that it highlights that, it forefronts that. People are like, wow, crazy groove stuff. Did you see that pattern? But then what you find probably needs to happen after 4 times or something is that the groove needs to change. Right? The setting that's the default needs to change. And then maybe you could keep doing it, but then let's say instead of playing this sort of like lazy groove, after 4 times I switch into like a fast groove. I'll just like double time it. So. Right? And when you land on that fast groove, because now you've, again, we'll talk about this more in depth later with repetition, but you've created an expectation. I'm going to go back to this slow groove. But then you go back to this really intense fast groove. That's potentially a moment that you're going to create. This really intense fill, right? People are with you. Like they're sort of like getting drawn deeper and deeper into this music, this moment. And then when they land, it surprises them. And it's, oh, and then it's like they pass the threshold and they're like, ah, and they're having a moment with it. It's like, oh, that was awesome. And they're like, wow, let's settle into it, right? That's a moment, right? That's cool. Like that is a moment of magic that you can create for the listener. There's potential there, right? I'm not saying I just did that. It's potential. So that's another shape. Playing a groove, playing fill. It has its benefits, it has its limits. Now let's look at third shape here, which is, again, pretty static, but we're going to look at 2 settings. So let's say we've got, drum and bass type stuff like I was just doing. And then we've got, so here's one setting. And then let's take an alternate backbeat. Alternate backbeats course, a bunch of alternate backbeats. One is just like playing quarter notes. Cool. That's its own little setting. There's only so much you can do with your kick drum's the only thing left that do interesting things, but that's great. So that's my one setting, this is my other setting, and in this shape, we're just keeping it static, but we're moving between 2 different things. This is a little bit of foreshadowing of a tool we're going to talk about later called groove modes, moving between subsets, right? Very intentionally. But what we'll find is each setting has its own sort of musical aesthetic to it. And so moving between them sort of builds in without you trying a change in the music. So let me just demonstrate this. I'll go A, B, A, B, and just feel the musical potential that's happening here, right? And notice, if you want, what is different about these 2 settings, right? There are some obvious things, but those are worth taking note of. And this is a moment where like simplicity is going to shine. Simplicity is going to be really effective because it's next to complexity. Okay, 1, 2, here we go. Okay, so I'm trying hard not, I'm resisting the temptation to explore other continuums while I'm doing this. Right? The point is setting next to setting, if you aren't moving much, creates an effective musical change. And in this, right, so this section of your solo, for example, or of a song, could be defined by this back and forth. As far as what's happening on top of that, that's for further exploration, right? So this lesson is about shapes, but you could pull in web of intent stuff and say I'm doing, okay, A, B, and during my drum and bass, A, I'm exploring the busyness, emptiness spectrum. And during my quarters, alternate backbeat, I'm exploring like syncopation versus smooth kick drum melodies. Doom, smooth, doom, 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 doom. Eighth note grid. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Syncopated. 16th note grid. Doom, 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 doom. Back over here. Right. So we can sort of stack these ideas on top of each other. But for now, let's just think about shapes. So that's A, B, back and forth between two settings. The next one is sort of another go-to here, the steady build. Right? So this is where your exploration of the continua, I'm not going to use that word, continuums on the web of intent are really all you need, right? So a steady build of this section is going to mean moving from the less tense to the more tense end of whatever continuum you're exploring. This probably doesn't need a whole lot of demonstration, but let's go ahead and choose an interesting continuum. Let's get in flow mode. And let's say, let me think here. So I'm going to make up a continuum that you're welcome to use as well. I'm in flow mode. My setting is 16th note flow mode on the toms and snare. And the continuum I'm exploring is how tom heavy it is and how snare heavy it is. So all the way, I'm just playing toms. And then on the other end, I'm just playing snare. So I'm going to do a steady build. I think that snare is going to be the building of tension here, and toms are going to be sort of the release. Right? They feel like snare feels like ka 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 ka. So that's what I'm going to try to create here, and I'm going to change nothing else. Right? So this could be made more effective by also changing the subdivision, by also changing the dynamics, just stacking the continuums here. But I'm not going to do that. We're just going to explore one continuum for this moment and see what happens. I'm moving toms. I'm moving toward the snare drum. Here we go. So moving toward the snare, just steady build. Trying to use only one continuum right now just for the sake of demonstration. But if I sort of release let's say I've explored several continuums and I go, okay, I'm just going to use all the tools in my toolkit now. Then I might be thinking, like I said before, adding more snare drums, increasing the subdivision. So when I go to the snare drum, I'm going some hertas, some triplets. I might be thinking about playing more syncopated stuff. Syncopated is more tense than unsyncopated, so I'm playing smooth, sort of square patterns here. And as I develop, I'm playing more syncopated patterns over here. So now I'm syncopating, I'm growing in volume, I'm changing the orchestration, I'm changing the subdivision. All these things are happening simultaneously, and the effect is a build. If I do a very short version of that, it'll sound like this. 3 into 4 into 5. Something like that. So anyways, the steady build. The next one is the build and conclude. Right? This is something I feel like I did a lot of, especially in my early drum soloing days. And a lot of times what I would do at the conclusion is try to call back to the thing at the beginning. Useful tool to give, again, coherence to the section or the whole solo. So let's say in this case, let's find like a kind of like a So if I want to call back to something, I'd like to make it kind of easy to remember. Doom, do, doom, boop, bop. Let's say I'm starting with that, and then I'm going to let it kind of grow, and I'll kind of come back to it at the end. Right, so there's something in psychology called the primacy and recency effect, where in a list of things that you've heard, you tend to retain in memory the beginning and the end of the list. Same goes for music. In this case, I'm really trying to leverage that to give coherence to what I'm playing. Because the beginning, doom, 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 I repeat it, just settles in there. At the end, I come back to the same thing, dum, da, da, dum, ga, and what you'll walk away basically feeling is A, that made sense, and B, which is saying a lot, B, it started with that cool rhythm on the toms. There was a bunch of stuff in the middle, and it came back to it. You're not going to remember any of the stuff in the middle, right? And as it gets more complicated, it's harder to identify, which is why the beginning and the end in this type of shape, it can be nice, is one way to think about it, to offer something that's really concrete and sort of musically memorable to refer to. All right, and then the last shape I want to think about here is waves. One that really isn't moving toward a destination like the previous couple, but that is more it's just pushing and pulling you. And that pushing and pulling sort of is the journey, right? It is enough, right? And again, this might be a section, this might be the whole solo. But let's take, I would think of Dave Weckl when I think of waves and this kind of shape in drumming. But let's say you've been working on the right, left, left kick subset, 4s and 2s, sounds like this. Let me see if I can use that vocabulary and create this feeling of growing intensity, releasing intensity, growing intensity, and you'll find it's going to be a lot of the same tools when we're thinking about the web of intent that we've already mentioned, where What grows intensity? Orchestrating further, more kick drums, more volume, more syncopation, more variety, bigger crashes. What removes tension? Smooth, unsyncopated melodies, simple orchestrations that move slowly around the drums, these types of things. Consistent dynamics. Anyways, let's see if I can do this. I've never tried this, but let's see what we can do. So I'll start low. We'll try to do this. 3, 4. I'm trying to create this push and pull, and I'm also trying to experiment with different sort of lengths for these builds. In the beginning, they were kind of like slow builds, and towards the end, I was experimenting with like, here we go, and we're already coming back down. Here we go, and we're already coming back down. Right, and as you can tell, right, this depends on me having, right, again, the vocabulary to push further along those ends of the continuum. But you can also notice that it's way more effective, engaging than the static version of this. Right? So what I demonstrated is the first shape, which is sort of non-movement on purpose. That is hard to make interesting, but has its place. This is sort of inherently captivating in a way. Right? You do feel this sort of like the solo is breathing in a way. It's living. And I think it doesn't hurt that there's a regularity to it. Familiarity, expectation, these things are big in music and in drumming. So in this case, it's interesting to think about. There is on one plane, familiarity, expectation. It's doing this. I kind of know where it's going, and I know that it's going to resolve. I know that it's going to build. I know that it's going to resolve. But the actual vocabulary is not repeating. Right? So there's just constant new combinations going on one level, fully improvised, never repeating. On another, what do I say? I want to say energetic level, but I just mean like intensity level. There is familiarity. And this is important. That's kind of what's missing from the static thing. We have something that we can latch onto, even if subconsciously. Start to feel we know where it's going, and that's a good thing. Okay, that's the sixth shape in this lesson. So now we have the conceptual ideas, again at a broad level, to start thinking about, to start planning and improvising solos with the vocabulary that you have. You know what we're trying to do, right, from the first lesson? We're trying to create moments. We're trying to create a coherent, engaging musical experience for the listener. We've laid out our personal settings that we have some comfort in. That helps us understand what we can do, what tools we can use, and where we can expand further. We have the web of intent, which helps us be creative in the moment and create movement in one direction or another, which creates engagement. And it also helps us understand where we can go back to the practice room and develop our settings, expand the boundaries of our settings. And now, in this lesson, we're not just randomly exploring the continuums, we're thinking about some of the most common shapes of solos and sections of solos so that we can choose a setting we want to be confident improvising in, continuums on the web of intent that are relevant to it, that we've spent time developing vocabulary so that we can push further, and then we think about a shape and try to use that vocabulary within the setting to create a coherent musical thought. And this is very exciting because what we're leading toward against here is coherence. And what you notice at each step, we've imposed a further constriction actually on what we're allowed to do. Defining a setting gets rid of everything else you could possibly play. Defining a continuum or a couple continuums on the web of intent reduces further what you're going to play. Okay, I'm not going to think about going off the grid. I'm not going to think about going triplets. I'm not going to think about some other continuum on there. So we're further reducing and reducing, and now we're looking at the shape, and we're even reducing sort of the options for the intensity of what we can play. And again, recurring theme, as I said somewhere earlier in this course, is that creativity really thrives with constraints and prompts. So you are filled with, in this chapter, constraints and prompts. Constraints are going to depend on your specific, unique vocabulary, but the prompts can be provided by these shapes, they can be provided by the continuums on the web of intent, and whatever ideas you've seen me play so far. All right, happy soloing. See you in the next lesson.